So, not only am I suspicious of this kind of attitude, but I also think it's often a signal of the opposite. It's like a trick, an over-the-top facade of masculinity and strength, most likely over the top because they don't actually have strength, and unfortunately, a lot of women are deceived by the display. But it is just a display, like a peacock, preening, no substance. Oh, don't get me wrong, they might be aggressive and violent, but at their core they are cowards and they know it. And I'm not talking about any guy who seems masculine, okay? This isn't an attack on confident, assertive guys. My granddad was assertive, confident, and even violent when he had to be. This isn't me saying men should shut up and drink soy or whatever you might accuse me of. This is my rejection of the proclamation that their selfishness makes them strong, that women should see that as a sign of their high value, that we should actually be impressed by the ease with which they sacrifice everything to their insatiable ambition, that we should be drawn in by their childish belief they are in fact the centre of the universe and can do whatever they please to whomever they like, because who's going to stop them? I reject that. I'm unmoved by that. I have disdain for that. I spit in the face of that, and I just see you as irredeemably pathetic cowards. No offence. I'd rather be stuck with a toad than chained all my life to a man like that. I've seen where that road goes, and it ends in despair. I don't find it hard to distinguish genuinely masculine men who have actual courage and the ones who are selfish, weak, and cowardly, and the latter repulses me. I don't know if this is just because I've had examples of both good and bad masculinity, possibly, but even as a teenager, I knew immediately which of my friends' boyfriends would cheat before they did. I called it so often, and I'm hardly ever wrong. I really trust my judgment on this now at this point. I was thinking about this. I was thinking about how to tell the difference between the real masculine men and the showy ones. It's always been just a feeling, hard to put your finger on, but I think I figured out what it is. Again, we come back to kindness. You can be the most masculine guy in the world, but if I can tell you're also kind, the strength is probably genuine. And not fake kind, that's just empty charm. I mean real kind, and you can feel real kind. There's truth to real kind. It's the ability to love. That's what tells me you're not dead inside, that there's not something in you slowly decaying that will inevitably crumble. The outside of the house can be as big and as flashy as it likes, but if it's infested with rot, it'll fall and fail eventually. It might take years, but it will happen. You'll choose yourself in the end, and you'll lie and say it's because you're strong, but really you're just afraid, so you'll sacrifice everyone around you to save yourself. I've seen it happen time and time again. I know the type. My granddad was a tough man. He had the opportunity several times in his life to exploit those weaker than him, and he never took it. He was strong enough that he would rather suffer than screw over other people because his courage was endless. He was unshakable, immovable, unable to be bribed or tempted or threatened because his principles mattered, and that made him solid as a fucking rock. You could have had a gun to his head and he wouldn't have given in. He was a deeply spiritual man, and death was preferable to sacrificing his soul, to sacrificing what made him what he was. And that's why he was so loved. Selfish men, and women too, but we're on the topic of bad boys, so. Selfish men, no matter how good they give it, how tough they seem, in the end, they can always either be bribed or tempted or threatened, because that's the nature of selfishness. It's as unreliable as building a house on sand. It's not strong or admirable to exploit the weak. They're weak. It's easy. That's kind of the point. I don't admire someone who can steal candy from a baby. The reason most people don't do it isn't because they can't, it's because they won't. The true weakness is giving in to that instinct. It's stronger to choose not to exploit someone than to choose to exploit someone, because you're willing to make life harder for yourself to not screw over someone else. And that is brave, because that is the harder thing to do. Give me a fucking break. Survival of the fittest, my ass. Willing to let others suffer so you don't have to is the most bitch move I've ever heard of. Like, for example, pimping out young women so you can get rich. Oh, very brave. Scummy doesn't even begin to describe it. Utterly contemptible. Yeah, that was a fun deep dive as I was looking into this topic. I won't say his name, he feeds on outrage, that's kind of the point of everything, isn't it? But he seems inescapable at the moment, everywhere. Definitely one of those men who'd be elbowing women and children out of the way to get on the lifeboat on the Titanic. Let's be honest, he's already done that, metaphorically. Throwing other people in the way to save himself, what's the difference? God, he's the worst, and he's everywhere now. He's funny, I'll give him that, and very crafty, but still the worst. By their actions you shall know them. Look at what people do and not what they say. Words are cheap. The reason I talk about this is because I do see a bit of a theme on that corner of the internet, and it's really not everyone in that sphere, but sometimes there seems to be a tendency to push towards callousness or selfishness and say that's what women find attractive, so you need to be a dick. It's certainly true you want strong boundaries and you don't want to be walked over. Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I'll even agree that some women, probably not well-adjusted women, but some women do like the more extreme end of being treated like shit. But I think, overall, that's just an easy shortcut into seeming manly, just being a bit of a dick. It's a bit of a trick, like I said, a magic trick, smoke and mirrors, a spell, an illusion, flashes and bangs to desperately distract from the fact the wizard behind the curtain is really just a bit of a bitch. They always turn out to be cowards, I'm telling you. I do not think being kind is a sign of being a pushover. I think some people seem to make this mistake. My granddad was a kind man, but he was not nice. He was never nice, and the last thing he was a pushover. It's the same with my dad. He's a very kind and generous man, but bloody hell is he stubborn and he's not nice. I can speak only for myself, but I've never been drawn to selfishness and I've never interpreted it as a signal of strength. What I've been trying in a very long-winded way to say is that the reason I don't find bad boys attractive is not because they're bad. The reason I don't find bad boys attractive is because they're weak. I'm just not turned on by someone who has all the inner strength of a soggy panini. Doesn't do it for me. The key word in bad boys, by the way, is not bad. It's boys. They're stuck in a permanent adolescence. If one of the primary functions of masculinity is to defend and protect, and you can make that argument from both an evolutionary and a spiritual perspective, and you not even don't do that, but actively do the opposite and exploit or harm those more vulnerable than you, then how are you masculine? How are you not still a boy? Grow up. Being self-serving is the easiest thing in the world. It's just a cult of selfishness disguised as male improvement. You're no better than the Instagram models you look down on, using self-love as an excuse to be self-obsessed. It's just as empty and meaningless. You're not better than them. Jesus.